here to the ocean studio of the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. In our previous three shows, we have engaged in an analysis of one of the great songs ever written. Its lyrics were composed by our Savior, a man very few people recognize in that role. He is also the Messiah and the Son of God, and to know his name is not Jesus, it's David. He was the king of Israel. He wrote these lyrics around 3,000 years ago, and he would endure what he is scribing about 1,000 years later, which is almost 2,000 years ago from our perspective now looking back on it. In the introduction to this psalm, Dowd spoke about what was beyond the eighth octave. And what he is ascribing is that the timeline that we know from God plays out over 7,000 years. There are 7 steps to Yahowah. Everything pertaining to Yahowah is a plan of 6 plus 1 equals 7. So the 6 mikre of PesachMatsahBikuwrym, Shavua, Teruah, lead to Bikuwrym, to Sukkah. So we recognize that Dowd fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikuwrym, Passover, unleavened bread, and firstborn children in 33 CE in his second of 3 lives, and that we are approaching the fulfillment of Shavua and Teruah, which will make Dowd's return on Bikuwrym possible, and then Yahowah is restoring all of this earth to the conditions experienced during Eden for us to get our act together and demonstrate that we are worthy of being trusted off this planet. And that will occur in the 1,000 years beginning on Sukkah in year 6,000 Yah, which is the 7th of October, 2033. The 8th octave, which he is addressing through this Mizmowr, is made possible by what he did 2,000 years ago in year 4,000 Yah, when he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikuwrym, because it enables us to capitalize on these things, and Pesach opened the doorway to life. When Dowd served as the Passover lamb, and on Matsah he removed our political and religious guilt so that we could be fully exposed in Yahowah's presence, be perceived as not guilty of these things. And on firstborn children, he paved the path for us to become the very children of the covenant. Those who are gleaned and harvested by God on Shavua and Teruah will go directly to this result. And then there will be a mortal remnant who survive the time of Israel's troubles, which begins on the Shavua of May 22nd, 2026, less than 6 months from now, and that will end in 2033 with Teruah in that year and the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. And that will purge this mortal remnant of Israel so that they can re-enter the garden with all traces of religion and politics, militarism and conspiracy, anti-Semitism, social media for sure, purged from the planet, so that mankind has the opportunity to earn God's respect, God's trust. We did a really lousy job in the garden, which is why we were booted from it. That is just the reality of this situation. And the reason that occurred is that Adam was conceived to engage with God, to act upon his instructions, to make a contribution, to make the garden and life and the relationship better. But he was a deadbeat. He didn't do anything. He didn't listen. He didn't respond. He didn't act. And he proved himself to be unreliable. And so God foreclosed on the garden experience and said, man's going to have 6,000 years to get our act together, to learn what it is that God is interested in seeing from us, to earn his trust so that he is comfortable allowing us to leave this planet, which is essentially Eden, protective enclosure that's conducive to life. And there will be many of us who pass muster, who show ourselves worthy, who are willing to engage, who are willing to listen, who are willing to respond, who are willing to learn, who want to be explorers, who are observant, and who prove ourselves trustworthy over time. And it is this opportunity that leads to the 8th octave, to us finally being released from this planet so that we can go explore the 2 trillion galaxies and hundreds of billions of stars in each of them, and enjoy a celebration of life in Yahweh's presence. This is what is being discussed. And then Dowd opened this by sharing with us that his will and Yahweh's will, Yahweh is God's one and only name, Dowd is the name of the king of Israel, it's not to David, that they were in lockstep, that they were in total agreement as to what should be done and how it should be done to resolve the problem of humanity and our propensity to be religious and political and militant, and therefore unreliable, undesirable even. And what Dowd said is that Yahweh wanted, and he concurred, that humanity be saved through him. You see, Dowd was the answer to all of Adam's failings. Dowd listened. He responded. He was exceedingly observant. He fell, and when he fell, he got back up, proving himself reliable and dependable. No one was a better collaborator than Dowd, doing the work that needed to be done. And so it is by mutual agreement that Dowd fulfilled Pesach, serving as the Passover lamb, his body fulfilling that ordeal in 33 CE, the exact day that he foretold it would occur when he spoke this prophecy as Gabriel to Daniel in 555 BCE, fulfilling it precisely when he had foretold in year 4000, 33 CE. And then he, on Matsah, the following day, his soul carried our guilt into Sheol, which is a black hole, referred to as hell, but there's no fires there, there's no tortures there. It's just a black hole where only time is infinite. It's a one-dimensional construct. And there he deposited our guilt, and the Ruach of Yahweh protected him in Sheol and released him to return to the Father on firstborn children, Bikuwrym. And he was the Bikuwrym of God. And so this is what he volunteered to achieve. It's all laid out throughout this Mizmowr. This Mizmowr, this psalm, is a declaration on that profound truth. It is the single greatest discovery pursuant to life and to God ever made. What I'm sharing with you should be front page of every newspaper. I'm assuming they still have those. Should be the lead story in the nightly news, assuming that people still watch the news. I hate to say that it'll be the number one trending post that goes viral on social media, because it is such a swamp of erroneous ideas, but nonetheless, it should all be that way. This is the greatest discovery in human history. Dowd, who the world thinks is David, has lived and will live 3 lives. He has lived 2, he will live 3. He wrote about all of this in his first life, lasted 70 years, concluded just prior to year 3000, 968 BCE. He was the man who unified God's people, Yisrael. He brought them into Jerusalem. He purchased the Temple Mount. That's tragically disputed place now that has the Islamic scars on it that need to be removed. He not only wrote 100 lyrics for psalms and prose for his mashal, Proverbs, defended Israel, fighting and winning 66 battles. He is the most important, most enlightened, most articulate, most interesting man in the world. God says of all humans that Dowd is his chosen one. He says of Dowd that he is his beloved son, that he is his father. He says of Dowd that he is the Messiah, that he is the returning king, that when Yahweh returns, it will be with Dowd. It's going to happen on Yom Kippurim, October 2nd of 2033. And that when he does, that his seat of honor was going to be as brilliant as the sun in God's presence, and that he, Dowd, will be Elyon, the influence of God among us. This is how important this man is. Now, what that means is twofold. One is that Dowd, David, is our Savior. He is the returning king. He is the Messiah that the world awaits. And it means that Paul lied when he created the myth of Jesus. It's nothing but a counterfeit of the truth pursuant to Dowd. It means that Judaism, Islam, and Christianity are all false. That the three Abrahamic religions all are destroyed by the truth of these lyrics, which were inspired by Yahweh. Now, Dowd in this psalm, just as he did in the 22nd and in the 88th, is describing the ordeal that he would have to endure to fulfill Pesach and Matsah. Now he's talking about Matsah. He says, my eyes no longer function properly because I can no longer see straight due to this distressful situation, as well as this mockery and the provocation that was been based upon erroneous perceptions. The condition is growing old and it's deteriorating. The situation is continuing to advance and is worsening, with all of my adversaries trying to degrade and confine me, troubling me. This is Mizmowr, lyrics to sing, Psalm 6:7. So let's think of what he is saying. First, Dowd's nefesh soul, and he's already in the previous statement say that God had made the commitment that he was going to save humankind through Dowd's nefesh soul. And so after Dowd's Bashar body in his second of three lives fulfilled Pesach as the Passover lamb, it was Dowd's nefesh that carried our guilt into Sheol. Now, Sheol is a black hole. It's a place of utter darkness. And so what Dowd says is when he took our guilt into this place of darkness, that his eyes could no longer function properly. He couldn't even see straight. And his ability to see in that environment would have been incapacitated. Your sight would have failed. And he says that the great tragedy, though, is that it didn't end there. Even though his soul was released from Matsah within 24 hours of its entrance, which is a long time in a place like that. It could have seemed like an eternity because of the way that time slows. While it could have been a blink of an eye. You know, it's time is relative to the observer. And in the place of great energy and mass, like a black hole, it would slow appreciably. So due to this distressful situation, this mockery and provocation based upon erroneous perceptions, what he's talking about here is that the greatest crime ever committed by humanity is when Paul, who was trained as a rabbi, created the myth, this lie based upon identity theft of Jesus. Now, he didn't write about a Jesus or of a Christ. He wrote about an Iesu Christou. And there wasn't a Jesus until the 1629 third edition of the King Iam's Bible became the King James Bible. So 16 centuries thereafter, the first mention of a Jesus. But this Iesu Christou fellow was conceived by Paul, a failed rabbi, to capture what had actually happened under a fraud. You see, Dowd had been there in 33 CE. He was, in fact, crucified by the Romans. He wrote about that ordeal in the 22nd Mizmowr in first person. And he had predicted the exact time he was going to arrive, which was year 4000 Yah, 600 years in advance. That's the prophecy in Daniel 9. I've worked out the math for you, and I've done prior shows on it. And so there was a man who was the Messiah. In fact, Dowd is announced as the Messiah 3 times. Jesus never even mentioned. Dowd is the king of Israel, so the Romans would have had every reason to crucify him because you asked, are you king of Israel? Damn straight I am. This is my country. I founded it. This is my city. It's called the city of Dowd that you happen to be oppressing people in, and you're occupying now. And I'm going to assure you that Rome will be destroyed, and the church that evolves from Rome will also be destroyed. Yeah, it's my city. I am the Messiah. I am not only the king of Israel, I'm coming back as the king of this world. Yeah, they would have every reason to crucify him, and that's why he was there. His body was to be crucified, and then his soul was to take our guilt into Sheol. So these things happened, and a man who was literally called the Son of God. Dowd is acknowledged 3 times by Yahweh as the Son of God. Served in this function, and that had happened in 33 CE, and Paul, writing in 52 CE, lied. He just transferred everything that was Dowdian, if you will, to this myth of Iesu Christou that also borrowed heavily from Dionysus and Mithras and the other pagan gods who were born of virgins and who were resurrected each year. So this is what happened, and it's a distressful situation. It cost so many generations of Israelis, Yehudim, their souls. It is an absolute and unmitigated travesty what has occurred, and it's so sad that Dowd could have made this level of sacrifice, to have endured this physical and emotional trauma, and to have the world deny him. Israel created Judaism through Akiba with the false Messiah Bar Kokhba, just to repudiate what Dowd had achieved. And he should have known better. There's no excuse for doing that. And in the vacuum where there was total ignorance among Greeks and Romans of what Yahweh had said through his prophets, the lie that was Iesu Christou prevailed. And it's a mocking provocation. Peter and Paul knew what they were doing. They were robbing Dowd to create this myth of an Iesu Christou. And it was all based on erroneous perceptions. It was annoying. It was saddening. That's what Dowd is speaking of here. The condition is growing old. It is, and it's deteriorating. The most popular religion in the history of the world is based upon a lie where Dowd's identity, his attributes, his accolades, his achievements were all robbed to create a false impression of a son of God and of a Messiah and King who was nothing but a myth, where the real one had done all of these things, had served as the Passover lamb so we might live, had taken our guilt into Sheol so we might enter God's company, had fulfilled firstborn children as God's firstborn son so that we might be part of his eternal family. All of these things he had done, and yet man had robbed him of them in Judaism, Christianity, and also Islam. And therefore, Dowd has many adversaries who try to confine and degrade him. And he speaks of Bakol Tisar. And Sha'ar is a variation of Shar, which is the word that is used throughout the prophets to speak of this time of Israel's troubles. We enter this time of Israel's troubles less than 6 months from now on Shavuot in 2026. That would be May 22nd. And it will last 7 years, continuing all the way to the fulfillment of Teruah in year 6000 Yah, which is 2033, the 23rd and 24th of September in that year. And so Dowd is lamenting how all of this has played out this way, inexcusably, because he and the other prophets and Yahweh, even in the Torah, was explicit that Dowd would do these things. And he has done them. And yet the world ignores him. So while Dowd is unique and irreplaceable, our empathy for our king and resulting respect grows when we try to see these events from his perspective. His willingness to offer his soul as the means to fulfill Chag Matzah was indeed Gabor. It was heroic, because the physical and emotional anguish would have been horrific. You might say, well, why would he do that? God, why would he condemn his own son? God didn't condemn his own son. Dowd made this choice. So why would Dowd choose to do it? First of all, you got to get rid of the myth of it. God is not a man. Men cannot kill God. God dying has no value whatsoever and cannot happen. And the whole Christian dead God on a stick thing is just utterly perverse, and bodily resurrection is pagan and stupid, going the wrong direction. So throw all that away. And let's start with Yahowah laid out a plan of 7 steps to resolve the problems in Eden for those who want to have the opportunity to explore the universe with him as his children and inherit the universe. And this path begins with the spring mikre, which Dowd fulfilled, PesachMatsahBikuwrym. Pesach opens the door to a second life. That is its purpose. And Dowd opened that door during his second of 3 lives. Matzah removes our religious and political guilt so that we can be exposed in God's company and be comfortable in his company. Now, if you recall, in Eden, before they disregarded Yahweh's advice, Adam and Chawah wore nothing but a smile. It was only after they had disregarded God's instructions that they found the need to be covered. And you could also recall that Dowd, when he was responsible for moving the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and he had the help of Obed-Edom, who's the character that's returning, according to Yahshua and Yahweh, to save many during these last days, that Dowd put on the breastplate of the high priest, because Dowd's going to anoint the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant upon returning on Kippurim, consistent with the Torah's instructions. And he is leading us back into Eden, which is why, apart from the ephod, he was bare-ass naked as he was celebrating the return of the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, because he knows he's leading us back into Eden, and he's comfortable being in God's presence, as we must all be. And this is what PesachMatsahBikuwrym do for us, which Dowd fulfilled. This leads us, of course, to Shabuah being the next of the 4th of the 7th steps that we take back home. It not only commences the time of Israel's troubles, but also denotes the gathering, this harvest of standing grain. And it will play out between the next 2 Shabuahs, 22nd of May, I should say, of 2026, and the 11th of June of 2027, between the beginning of the time of Israel's troubles and this harvest of mature grain. And then we reach Teruah, where on the evening there's the final gleaning, and the next morning there's the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah to purge this mortal remnant of Israel, so that we can be there prepared for Dowd's return with Yahowah. And that occurs on Yom Kippurim, so that the earth is restored to the conditions of experienced Eden, and the doors back into the garden are opened, with the whole earth being transformed for a 1,000-year celebration of Sukkah. This is the story. Dowd plays the central role in that story. And it's tragic that the world doesn't know it. I mean, at this point, not only doesn't the world know that Dowd fulfilled Passover as the lamb in his second of 3 lives, even though he spoke specifically of doing so, they don't even know what matzah represents. They think that Passover is a 7-day celebration, but it's not. Passover is just the first day of Chag Matzah, and that matzah is the most important, the most essential of that days of that celebration. And it includes Bikuwrym. And they don't know that just as the spring Mikre were fulfilled in year 4,000 Yah, the fall Mikre will be fulfilled in year 6,000 Yah. So in Dowd's case, there was something more debilitating than the anguish that he endured fulfilling Passover and unyeasted bread by having the Romans torture him, his body, and then having his soul carry our guilt into hell. And that was having endured the hellish ordeal for the benefit of his people, only to have Israel and Yehudah deny what he had done. That is Dowd's issue here. He's mad as hell. He can't see straight. I agree with him. Between Judaism and Christianity, both conceived by Jews, as was, by the way, Islam, all the religious aspects of the Quran are Talmud stories that were sold by rabbis to Muhammad. Otherwise, you would not even know that the Quran existed or that Muhammad lived. He was nothing but a terrorist thug in his own day. And so if it wasn't for rabbis selling Muhammad their Talmud stories, Islam wouldn't exist. And they have collectively rendered erroneous everything that Dowd achieved. And it's grown really old. We have been conditioned to become especially alert every time Dowd's significance is being assailed, because it is quite simply he is the most important person in Yah's plans for his people, especially his children. The Sa'ar adversary has done a masterful job of Sha'ar diminishing his relevance, Sha'ar assailing his credibility, especially through Shaul, Paul, and Rabbi Akiba, the founder of Rabbinic Judaism. So with Dowd's Sha'ar significance constrained. By the way, you know what the operative term is in Mitzrayim? Shar. It is the plural of Shar. In fact, the beginning syllable is to ponder the implications of Shar, of these troubles, being many. This is what Mitzrayim, Egypt, actually means. And that's why we're being told that the last 7 years, which begins here on Shabuah, the 22nd of May of 2026, is a time of Shar, of troubles, of being constrained, of adversarial abuse of God's people. And so the significance of the greater luminary, which is who Dowd is, of the Tree of Lives, it's also who Dowd is, of the ultimate Yahud, the man whose city, Jerusalem, is actually named after himself. It is the city of Dowd, who on Moriah, a place he not only had his home, but he acquired for Yahweh's home. And Zion speaks of the signs that he and his father posted along the way. He is the central figure even of the Torah, as Moshe in the 18th chapter speaks of him. And he is the enabler, according to Yahweh in the 89th Mizmowr, of the Bereth covenant. And yet, the beloved son, the main branch, the Shemach, the anointed Masiach, the chosen Ra'ah shepherd, the very El Lamb of God, and Yisrael's king, Malek, who more than anyone else is responsible for Israel's redemption and reconciliation, is now calling his people home, recognizing that there isn't one in a million of them that realize what he has achieved and how the path that he paved with Yahweh is the only way back home. In fact, his people misconstrue his name. They claim that they have a Megan, a star of David. Don't even know Dowd's name. And they're too dumb to know that Dowd didn't have a star. That star of David is the star of Bar Kokhba, who is the star. It is totally pagan. It is irresponsible, because under that star that Israel was tormented as Jews were herded into the Holocaust. Never should be a symbol of Israel or of, I don't care what they choose for Judaism. It's demonic anyway. But Jews, Israel, I don't know. I don't know Dowd's name. They don't know that he's the Son of God. They don't know he's the Savior. They don't know that he is returning King. They don't know that he is the returning Messiah. They don't know any of this stuff. They don't even know Yahweh's name. So there's a lot to accomplish between now and the time that our voice grows dim. So in addition to overall hostility towards Dowd and a fixation on discrediting him through religion, there is this mantra that is devoted to mischaracterizing the very Torah from which Dowd's walked out of its pages. Now, also interesting in this regard, pertaining to Sar and Sarar, we are once again confronted with the realization that Dowd's adversaries will be responsible for Yisrael's troubles, and thus be indistinguishable from Yahweh's enemies. And that would be every Christian, every Muslim, every one of the Haredi, the Orthodox Jews. It's a terrible time that awaits Israel, and all brought on by their own poor choices. The nation is going to be besieged as well as the people, and that is largely because Jews are Jews and not Yehudim. Yom Sarah, known as the time of Yaakov's troubles, is based upon Sa'ar, and as far as I can tell, the only time is good to, the only period when it's good to have enemies is when our foes are adversarial to God and his people, and then we need to expose and condemn them, excoriate them. It's a badge of honor right now to expose and condemn Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and Marxism, all enemies of God's people. So Dowd, like his heavenly father, had no use or interest in anyone who was opposed to Yahweh. And he, like God, was and remains committed to ridding our planet of their stench. This, of course, would be all of the religious. There isn't the mention of Yahweh's name in the Christian New Testament, in the Talmud, in the Zohar, or in the Quran. They do not speak for God. So in this light, it is one of the few places where it all matters exactly how we render these words and how we come to understand who is working on behalf of God and who is opposed to them. So Dowd says, get away from me, all of you who carry out that which is corrupt and deceitful, because Yahweh has heard the voice sounding my lament and the expressions of my consternation. You know, it's called the Sermon on the Mount. It was actually a speech that was delivered by Dowd as the Messiah prior to fulfilling PesachMatsahBikuwrym. It was recorded by the Emonim, who were Hebrews, Jews speaking Hebrew, who recognized the Messiah for who he was. Their account, written in Hebrew, was plagiarized by Matthew, who then took credit for it and became the 5th, 6th, and 7th chapters of the book of Matthew, the rest of Matthew, with the exception of the Olivet Discourse, which also comes from these Emonim. Rest of it's copied from Mark and from Luke. The whole book was written in 95 CE, so certainly not an eyewitness. But they recorded what Dowd said in the Sermon on the Mount, and one of the lines in the Sermon on the Mount is very much like this, you know, get away from me. I do not know you. I want nothing to do with you. You know, as the Sermon on the Mount is so destructive to Christianity, which is, I'm just flabbergasted that not only did the person writing under the pen name of Matthew include it in his so-called gospel, but that Eusebius, when he was amalgamizing the text, didn't cut it out, because it and the Olivet Discourse both destroy the religion of Christianity. And so here we have that same line, get away from me. Whether by compulsion or choice, leave me alone, go away, because you have rejected and forsaken what Dowd represents, and he will be taken away and abolished, removed from his presence. Call him imperative, literally and on an ongoing basis. All of you, not some of you, all of you. That which is corrupt and deceitful, religious, ewon, injurious, dishonest, fraudulent, idolatrous, harmful, misleading, malignant, has heard the voice sounding my lament and the expressions of my consternation. Yeah, Dowd's pissed. The Messiah hates the majority of his people and all who are religious. All of those who have deceitfully plastered over what he achieved, hiding the truth, burying it. That's what Peter and Paul said. Dowd's buried. He's not in heaven. So we're free to steal everything that pertains to him and give it to our myth of Jesus. It's corrupt. It's deceitful. It's dishonest. It's fraudulent. Christianity is a fraud. It is a crime. Everything Dowd did, everything he achieved by fulfilling Pesach, Matsah, and Bikuwrym, so we might live, so we might be perceived as not guilty in God's presence, so that we might be enriched and empowered as his children. The fact that he is returning as the king of earth and then the universe, that he is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah, that he is the chosen one, that he is our Savior. All of that was stolen by Peter and Paul. All of it. It's dishonest, it's fraudulent. And Yahowah's heard it. Yahowah's even more upset than Dowd is. God hates the religious. Let that sink in. God damn religion. They did this to him, to his son. And it wasn't until Yahowah found a goy who would listen to him, who would act based upon his words, whom he could infuse with the seven spirits of Yahowah, who would invest, well, already now 24 years going where his words lead, that he heard Yahowah's voice screaming out through the prophets on how disgusted he is that everything he achieved through his beloved son has been negated, covered over, smeared with lies, the crime ever committed. And finally, right now, in your hearing, this crime has been solved. And you now know the greatest discovery ever made. There was no Jesus. There is no Allah. Muhammad was not a prophet. The New Testament did not come from God. The Torah, prophets, and Psalms tell one story. Yahowah is God. Dowd is his beloved son. The 7 Moed Mikre were and will be fulfilled on the proper days, in the proper time, with Dowd, David, the Messiah and Son of God, our returning king, fulfilling the first 3 in year 4000 Yah, and returning on Bikuwrym, the 6th of the 7, in year 6000 Yah 2033. That's the truth. And just as it says in the first chapter of Genesis, the opening book of the Torah, Dowd, as the greater luminary, is finally having the truth about him reflected by the lesser luminary, so that they now serve as signs of the Moedim, of these restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony. Pesach, Matsah, Bikuwrym, Shabuah, Teruah, Bikuwrym, and Sukkah. And indeed, as we turn the page into the second chapter of Genesis, Bereshit, the second book of the Torah, we find that their branches are intertwined. Dowd is the tree of lives. And his lesser luminary, his herald, the one whose voice, whose call is now sounding this alarm, who is presenting this news to you, is the tree of knowledge. This is where we are. Psalm 6:8. Dowd wants to rid himself and the world of those who are misleading and who are religious. which would be every Christian, every religious Jew, every Muslim, every Hindu, every Marxist too. That's the religion of man. He is not interested in saving them. This is the great misnomer of religions that, if you convert to Islam, your soul will somehow, I guess not in Islam, it's not your soul, it's your body that will be transported to a garden where there is all sorts of decadent behavior. And if you don't capitulate to Allah and surrender to Allah and follow Muhammad's putrid example of being a terrorist, mass murderer, pedophile, rapist, and thief, that you're tortured forever in hell. No. Or this myth of Christianity that if you believe, but Paul's gospel, that somehow you're going to be escorted to heaven. And if you don't, you're going to be burned in hell. No. Or that God wants to save all the little children. No. No. God wants to save everybody. He wouldn't have tossed our sorry souls out of Eden, would he? If he wanted to save everybody, the story wouldn't have played out the way it did. He would simply say, there's no purpose to the human experience. I don't care what you believe. I don't care what you say. I don't care what you call me. I don't care about anything. We'll just go and we'll negate this entire experience and everybody's saved. God, then heaven would be like the hell we've experienced on earth, wouldn't it? See, God's not an extrovert. He is not trying to save everybody. All he wants is a few good men and women. Some people he can trust, some people who are willing to listen to him, who are able to respond appropriately to what he has to say, none of which happened in Eden. Someone who is willing to engage and work with him, as was Dowd, who's reliable, who isn't perfect, but when they make mistakes, they get back up. So this is the truth. A number of years ago, I can recall that I went through a trying episode with a covenant member, not a long-time friend, who didn't like the way I responded to an email filled with the revolting religious arguments of a moody theological seminary graduate. Oh, God, that goes back a long time. I took Dowd's approach, which was to expose and condemn the religious diatribe. Well, my friend not only condemned me for doing so, he advocated accommodation and acceptance, drawing the Christian into fellowship rather than push him away. Dowd would push him away. I pushed him away. I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to tell you the truth. You can either reject the lie of religion and embrace the truth of the relationship, or go away. I'm not here to bring all little children unto God. No. In fact, I would most like to have most of you go away. Those who are wearing their black suits and jumping like monkeys and the ultra-Orthodox forms of Judaism, I never want to see again. You're too stupid. You're not redeemable. And the same thing would be true with any overt Christian or overt Muslim. Words and reason are never going to resonate with you. Just go away. You've either been poisoned beyond hope, or you're one of those that's dishing out the poison. God's not here to save the religious. He's here to save you from religion, not with religion. And so you're going to have to do as the covenant requires. Walk away from religion and politics before any of this is even going to resonate with you. And then if it does, then now is your opportunity to listen. God has a plan that will bring you unto him. If you like what he's offering, which, by the way, isn't bonbons on fluffy clouds while everybody lounges around and sings hymns, that's not what God is looking for. He made it really clear in Eden. He's looking for people who want to engage and make a contribution, who will listen, who will respond. And when difficulty arises, they know how to get up if they stumble. That's what God is looking for. If that's you, then inquire within. Go to YadaYah.com. There's 35 books there. They're all offered free. Read your way to the truth. Since Yahweh has affirmed that Dowd is right and clearly inspired these lyrics, The correct approach to the theological postulates and fraudulent religious rhetoric is to respond the same way that Dowd did. We're to follow his example. We are not born into a spirit of compromise, but instead of contrast. If we are not distinctly different, and if we do not show it, we're not covenant. Stated another way, no one has ever come to know God by advocating or accommodating religious positions. Until a person starts questioning their religion, Yahweh and his testimony remain outside of their grasp. God's word is squandered on those who argue on behalf of the counterfeits, like Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Therefore, when somebody says or writes something to us which we know to be inconsistent with Yahweh's testimony, our initial responsibility is to refute the fraudulent claims. Then, when corrected, if the individual acknowledges that they were wrong and if they are receptive to the truth, then we can share the Torah and its Berith covenant with them. We can speak to them of Dowd and of Yahowah. Now, addressing the wrong approach, you will find obey written after listen and hear among the definitions of Shema in many lexicons, even though there is no support for that connotation, not linguistically, not etymologically. And yet, this is one of the many statements in which the very notion of rendering Shema as obey is absurd, since Dowd is speaking to God. The religious want their constituents to obey them, which they achieve by misrepresenting God's instructions as commands and then misrepresenting his vocabulary such that listen is convoluted into obeying. But how many times can we point this out before people start to realize that, to believe the religious rhetoric, you're like the rabbis in the black suits banging their heads against the stone wall. Dowd had enough. And who's to blame him? Now, since Annie, modifies Baki, consternation, not the cold voice, it is quite possible and perhaps likely that the voice is that of the king's herald, and I think it is true. He would vocalize the Zeroah's, the sacrificial lamb's lament at this time when the injurious delusions are so pervasive and debilitating. Now, turning to the next statement. Dowd realized that when we ask God to do what he wants done, we can be assured that he will do as we requested. So while tefillah does not mean prayer, if you want your petitions to God answered, well, follow Dowd's example. And as you do so, please note how often he refers to Yahweh by name. In this one statement, there are two more references to Yahweh's name than you will find in both Talmuds, the New Testament, and Quran combined. Yahweh has listened to Shema, this favor for me, this consideration for me. Yahweh has received, grasped hold of, and accepts my thoughtful request to intervene, my desire to provide intercession. It's from Palah mediation regarding intervening and providing a means to avoid judgment. And it's based upon thoughtful consideration and a diligent assessment leading to a responsible reaction. Mizmowr, lyrics to sing, Psalm 6:9. And so here we are. Once again, we find evidence that Dowd went to Yahweh with this request. And he did so for a myriad of reasons. He wanted to redeem himself and save his people by fulfilling Pesach and Matsah. His motivations were pure. His argument was sound. And so, considering the cost and benefits, Yahweh agreed with his son. He not received his request to intervene. He accepted it, quickly grasping the implications. Now, I want you to know that recognizing that Dowd had foretold that he would endure crucifixion, fulfilling Pesach, and that his soul would enter Sheol on Matsah to fulfill it, and then enjoy the result, Bikuwrym, and the 22nd and 89th Mizmowr. And to see through the first 35 Mizmowr Psalms, Dowd consistently expressing the fact that he had decided and that Yahweh agreed that he would save God's people, that they would produce salvation by collaboration. It is one thing to recognize that that's true, to recognize that Dowd therefore fulfilled PesachMatsahBikuwrym in his second of three lives. It is another thing entirely to come to understand how it came to be. How did Dowd discern that this was the right thing for him to do? Why then did he, so first, how did he discern that he should do this? Why did he decide that it was in his interest to do this? And then why was he able to convince Yahweh that he should suffer in this way on behalf of the children of the covenant? And until you can answer those questions and then review the entire prophetic framework in its entirety to recognize that it consistently explains this, you're not in a position to go forward with this great discovery of Dowd serving as our Savior. And what I learned is that Dowd recognized that you read the opening chapter of the Torah, Bereshith, Genesis 1, and you realize that he is the greater luminary. He would have seen himself in that role, serving as the sign of the Moedim, and he would have recognized the Moedim or PesachMatsahBikuwrym going through the last and Sukkah. So he would have seen himself in that role. I'm convinced he probably also would have seen himself as the Tree of Lives in the second chapter of Genesis. He most certainly would have seen himself as Eldad when Moshe failed with the children of Israel, when they got to be too much for him. He would have seen himself as Eldad, as Yahweh's beloved. After all, his name was Dowd, and Eldad means God's beloved. He would have known that he was that prophet. He would have seen himself in Devarim 18, which is that magnificent ode to the future arrival of Dowd and all that would be accomplished with him. And he most certainly would have seen himself in the story of Abraham and Yitzhak climbing Mount Moriah, when the discussion focuses on a father and son. And when Yahweh says, I will provide the lamb, after a discussion on don't take the life of your son, your only son whom you love, he would have immediately seen himself as Dowd, because his name means beloved, and Yahweh had 3 times already said, he is my son, I am his father. And with the episode that transpired in 2 Samuel 6 and 7, where Yahweh speaks of bringing Dowd back in this magnificent way and reinforces that Dowd is, in fact, Yahweh's beloved son, that he would have recognized that this is his role. He would have seen himself in this role. And then realizing how impossible it had been for him to lead Israel. In fact, his own son led a coup against him. His wife besmirched his reputation, denied all the things that were pertinent about him. And he would have seen Moshe in the 11th chapter of Numbers, of Bamidbar, giving up, saying, God, just kill me, because this job is impossible. These people cannot be led. It's a miserable cast of characters. He would have recognized that God's commitment to bring him back as king forevermore is a job that cannot be achieved unless something were to happen that was different. And so Dowd realized, well, it's my role to fulfill PesachMatsahBikuwrym. And if I do, every single one who will live forever with Yahweh, whom I will be king over will be there because I made this sacrifice. He knew he would earn the respect of everyone. And so it was 2 days of suffering for an eternity of respect. It was the right call. And he knew he could trust Yahowah to pull it off with him. And he did. And so he went to Yahowah and said, obviously, this is what you want, and let's do this together. And Yahowah agreed. It was the right call. What greater way to establish his beloved son's character and credibility than to accomplish all of this through him? And that's how it all materialized. Now, as we return to this prior statement, just on a technical point of view, takina appeared in it, and it's a very difficult word to translate because its root, chanan, mercy, does not work in the sentence. Further, it cannot be applied to Dowd in this context. So to better appreciate the meaning of takina, we need to consider how it is used earliest in its debut in the Torah. And there we find out that it is conveyed in a disproportionate amount of time in the hitpael stem, which is rare. That's where the speaker is acting on his own initiative, not being influenced by anyone else. And in these cases, takana is an earnest plea by someone beseeching another for favor without any outside influence. It's not providing a favor, but instead requesting one, which is why I defined it as such in my translation of Mizmowr 6:9. So Dowd was requesting a chanan, a favor. In fact, two of them. One is he wanted the popular deceptions and religious delusions swirling around him silenced so that his people could capitalize on his sacrifice. In addition, he wanted Yahowah to approve his request, which was the most wonderful and terrifying decision ever made. He wanted the opportunity to serve as the Pesach. It's quite a request, isn't it? And yet, there is still another challenge in that sentence, and this one is overcoming a long history of religious corruption. In English Bibles, they render talifa as prayer, even though there is no basis for that connotation in the etymology of the word. It is either from pala or from pale, and it means to think and consider when, and then to judge. So to exercise good judgment, which is to mediate then and request intervention. It speaks of what Dowd wanted to achieve for his people. And the best way to do it was to fulfill Chag Matzah. So lastly, the use of lakach, meaning to grasp, to receive, to accept, and to hold, is also a bit ill-fitting when viewed from the perspective of obtaining and holding someone in one's hands. But it is perfectly suited to the idea of mentally embracing an idea of grasping its meaning and then accepting the potential that we can learn from this. So cognizant of these realities of the actual meaning of shama, of takina, of lakach, and tefillah, I think my translation not only differs markedly from the more popular renderings, but is vastly more meaningful. But what I always want to do is, if my rendering of the words is different than the religious publications, I want you to know why. I want you to be aware of my rationale. And I want you to be able to do these same word studies, to look at those 4 words and examine them as I have shared their etymological roots and first use meanings throughout the Torah, and examine them as I did. Go through the process. Validate them. Or if you want to oppose them, that's fine too. but at least be informed, be reasonable, be rational. Approach this logically, systematically, and then be aware of the importance of laying everything upright so that everybody knows precisely the reasons that you have come to these conclusions, which is the unique aspect of my translations and also of my analysis on behalf of them. So here we find that the prime purveyor of forgiveness isn't usually, well, in this case, is in a usually unforgiving mood. So we should therefore view Dowd's sacrifice as a divisive thing. It separates those for whom it was intended from those who would deny what he has accomplished, like the religious. Said another way, while Dowd perfected the children of the covenant by taking our collective guilt into Sheol and depositing it there, never to be seen again, he also earned the right to determine Sheol's future inmates. And as it would transpire, he is eager to humiliate those who disparaged his name, who dishonored his titles, who disdained and besmirched his accolades, who completely negated the value of his sacrifice for billions of people. And so this will be our last statement of this Mizmowr for today's program. We'll return to it as we open our program hopefully tomorrow, weather permitting. You can see it's a little breezy here with the trade winds in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It reads, "All my enemies with animosity and rancor will be ashamed, and they will be humiliated as a result of their own choices. They will have chosen their fate, which will be terrifying and agonizing beyond comprehension, receiving that which they have chosen to perpetrate. So once again, as a result of their own choices and having turned away, they will be held accountable for their shameful ambitions in an instant and continually thereafter." Mizmowr lyrics to sing Psalm 610. You need to know that this is for keeps. You can choose to be religious or in the relationship, or not at all. If you're beguiled by religion, if you choose just to opt out for all of this, no hard feelings, your life ends like most do, and there is no reward, no punishment for you. Your soul simply ceases to exist. Fair. However, if you are demonstrating animosity and rancor towards Dowd by perpetrating identity theft through Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, that's a different story. And so for those, they're going to be ashamed. They will be humiliated because they've made this choice. The difference between omission and commission. Omission, you've been misled. So sorry for you. Commission, you are doing the misleading. You are one of those people now in social media that is a keyboard evangelist promoting the stupidity of your religion that is based on the crime of identity theft. And Dowd says they chose their fate. And their fate of the promoters of religion, of anti-Semitism, of anything that is opposed to what Dowd has achieved. They chose their fate. It's going to be terrifying. It's going to be agonizing. It's going to be worse than you can comprehend, to be incarcerated forever in a black hole. Because this is what they've chosen to perpetrate. We know that it is their choice because the Niphal stem tells us that they carried this out and then brought the consequence upon themselves. The imperfect conjugation says that it will be enduring. And the juice of mood says that they chose it. Third person expression of volition. So once again, as a result of their own choices and having turned away, they will be held accountable for their shameful ambitions. Shub Bosh. You need to understand that we make our choices and we're going to be held accountable. If God didn't hold the religious, the anti-Semitic, the conspiratorial, and the overtly political, the militant accountable for all of the harm they have inflicted, then he wouldn't be fair. And I can assure you he's going to. All of those people who have damaged Dowd's reputation through religion, who have denied what he achieved through Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and who have tormented God's people through Marxism, communism, and conspiracy, you're going to be held accountable. Your behavior was shameful. And this moment is going to occur in an instant, and then it will endure forevermore. We're working towards that instant now. And that instant is on Teruah. Right after the Teruah harvest, at the dawn of Teruah, right around 6 o'clock p.m. as the sun sets in Jerusalem, the 23rd of September, 2033. Many things are going to happen. And one of those is that everyone who has been opposed to Dowd, to Yisrael, to Yehudim, to Yahowah, to the Torah, to Jerusalem, God's people, to be particularly these plundering Muslims and Marxists, they're going to be exterminated. It'll happen in an instant. And everything that they have brought to bear against Israel and all of the religious edifices will all be incinerated in an instant. And then they will be held accountable. And the accountability will be forevermore. You have been forewarned. Mizmowr lyrics to sing. All of this I'm sharing from the 6th Psalm. I thank you for listening. We'll resume in this place in our next program.